What's up, guys? It's Dakota, and just this past Saturday, me and a few friends went to a Star City Games Invitational Qualifier in Columbus, Ohio, and it went pretty well. And this is going to be like my tournament report with kind of a special surprise at the end. So there was 77 players that showed up. So that meant there were 7 rounds of Swiss, cut the top 8, and then in all invitational qualifiers, the top 2 players or whoever makes it to the finals gets the invites to the qualifier. So before I get into the tournament and everything and how it goes, I want to go over the deck that I played. And for anyone that knows me, I've been on this deck for almost 2 years. Well, 2 years running. I started playing it when it started to gain popularity, and even through the bad times with humans coming around and more degenerate combo decks coming up, this is still the deck that I love playing, and probably the deck that I will continue to play as long as it's viable or as long as Death Shadow is still a legal card in Modern. So this is like a visual view of my deck. I'll be going just from the top left down to the bottom and everything. So first off, playing Grixis Shadow in this tournament. Namesake of the deck, 4 Shadows and 4 Gurmag Anglers are the main threats of the deck. There's 4 Street Wraith, must have. You can cycle it. It's essentially like playing 56 cards in your deck because it just draws you a card and it lets you lose life, making your Death Shadows bigger initially, or making them bigger, and then also a good way as like a combat trick to grow your Shadow bigger if someone tries to use a damage-based removal spell. The draw to playing this deck and what makes it so powerful is pretty consistently on turn 2, you can play either a Death Shadow, who is like a 3/3 or a 4/4, or you can play a Gurmag Angler that's a 5/5 on turn 2 and just have this huge clock in play super early. The pros and cons of both of them, like obviously Death Shadow dies to like Fatal Push, and Gurmag Angler doesn't, but Death Shadow gets incrementally bigger and can get so big to the point where cards like Temur Battle Rage can just win you the game in just one attack step. It's amazing and fun and very brutal if you're the person sitting on the other side, because there's just a chance that if you don't have anything, you could just die to a Battle Rage plus a reasonably sized Death Shadow. And things that are kind of more constant, Mishra's Bauble is a way to pseudo-scry with your fetch lands to essentially say like, well, do I really like this card on top, or do I like the spell that I could potentially play in my hand? If you don't, then you can just fetch it away with one of your fetch lands, shuffle, play the spell, and then just draw a random card off the top of your library. Or if you decide that you still want to play a 1-drop in your hand and you have a Street Wraith and you have a Bauble, you can Bauble the top card. If you like it, cycle a Street Wraith and draw it, or kind of like how Mishra's Bauble works on like the slow cantrip of drawing a card at the beginning of the next turn, the next turn's upkeep. You just draw that card with Street Wraith right now and then draw the card with Bauble later. In my version, there's some that play 3 and 4. I chose to play 3 because I'm also playing Serum Visions in my deck, just as a way to cantrip more and really kind of Xerox through your deck and find your 1 of your 8 threats or 2 of your 8 threats. Looting is kind of like another Thought Scour in the deck, where it draws you more cards, but you have to discard 2 cards as well, and it's something that you can do later when you're really just spinning your tires doing nothing. The removal that the deck plays is very dependent, and while you can say about all modern decks and how they're constructed in a certain way with how the meta works, this is the most in general. Like if you're going to just a big tournament like an invitational qualifier or an open or anything like that, this is the setup I like of removal spells, and I hate that they're kind of all over the place, but just kind of bear with me here. The 2 Fatal Pushes, 3 Bolts, and then 2 Dismembers. Why playing 2 Dismembers over the Dismember and Terminate split? I just like the fact that Dismember kind of fuels this Death Shadow plan, and it's also just a super efficient removal spell, and it's not color dependent, so you're not forced to fetch out other red sources super early when you just want to get like black-white source or black-blue sources. So that's my reason for liking Dismember. With Amulet Titan coming around, you might want to consider more of the 1-1 split, but until that deck really starts taking over Modern and becoming just a huge threat and the number one deck people are playing, I think playing 2 Dismember is, for the most part, correct. Playing 3 bolts to 2 pushes, I like the reach that push gives, plus it kills a lot of the popular creatures that are played in Modern, plus having 2 fatal pushes, like you're still able to find at least one or maybe both of them, considering all the cantripping the deck does and all the deck manipulation that you have. You can easily find at least 1 or 2 of them relatively quickly to deal with whatever threat you need fatal push. And of course you have Snapcaster Mages to flash back these spells, which again kind of puts a bigger price, to me anyway, on being mana efficient and having 1 and 2 mana spells, which is why also playing 17 total lands, let's see here, and then 2, 2, 1, 1, and 1, and 7 lands that actually tap for mana, having Snapcaster Mage and just being able to flash back like a Dismember or any of these 1 mana spells is super important. And not having to have 4 mana for Snapcaster Terminate, instead you could have 4 mana to pay 2 life for a Dismember and still kill the good majority of creatures, or enough creatures for it to matter, instead of Terminate just killing all creatures and having them not be regenerated. So going through the removal, the cantrips, now onto like what makes the deck super powerful, aside from obviously the Death Shadows and losing the life, is the split of discard spells and the essentially 1 mana negates that are in the deck. So playing Thoughtseizes and Inquisitions, the 4-2 split, obviously Thoughtseize is way better for this deck because you just play your untapped dual lands and then you also just take the best card out of their hand or their removal spell, any sort of interaction they have with you, and you lose 2 life, which obviously is supposed to be a drawback of the card, but instead is good for you, because it just makes your Death Shadow bigger, and you really don't care about the life loss because you're able to mitigate and control the amount of life that you lose. Inquisition, also just a good mostly catch-all discard spell. Obviously, it has its spots where it's bad, but Inquisition takes most of the removal spells and spells that you, for the most part, care about. That Thoughtseize can obviously clean up the rest of them. You want Thoughtseizes, but there's also spots where Inquisition is just very good. And again, mitigating the life loss in the deck. You don't always want to lose life when you cast spells. So Inquisition being the card that you play is obviously really good. And the reason for playing 6 discard spells instead of more discard spells as a way to give protection for your threats and to clear the way is that generally these discard spells are dead later in the game, and you would just rather be able to either Faithless Looting them away or Serum Vision scry them to the bottom, obviously if you draw them, or if you're about to draw them rather. And then finally, for all the main board cards, there's 1 Kolaghan's Command in the deck as just a really flexible get back a Death Shadow or a Gurmag Angler or even a Street Wraith to try to make your shadow bigger. There's been plenty of times where it's come up where you just Kolaghan's Command to make them discard the last card. You pick up a Street Wraith, cycle a Street Wraith to then make your Death Shadow bigger, so it gets out of range of like a Lightning Bolt or a Lightning Axe, even for things like that. Also, just very good against Affinity in the main board and Hardened Scales Affinity and decks like that, which is why we also kind of play another one on the sideboard. And obviously I'll get to the sideboard when we're done here in a second, but there are some changes that I would make to the sideboard that I wish I would have made before the tournament, but wasn't really super punished for not making that decision. So that is the main board in its entirety, and obviously the deck is just trying to put one of its 8 threats into play as early as turn 2. You could theoretically turn 1 a Shadow with a crazy draw, but the idea is to stick one of these and then have just Stubborn Denial as a backup counterspell for when they try to remove your threat, and then just ride it to victory. As far as like the mana base, you play 4 Bloodstained Mire and 4 Polluted Delta, just because those fetch out your important basics, because you more than likely, or more often than not, want basic Swamp over basic Island, but you still also like the flexibility of Polluted Delta more than Scalding Tarn, just because it can get both your basic swamp and your basic island. So you play 4 of each of those. You play the 2 Scalding Tarn just because it's obviously you can get basic island, but just because you're more than likely fetching an untapped dual land on turn 1, and you don't want Scalding Tarns to obviously get basic lands because 1, you're not in a good spot. 2, it doesn't get basic swamp, which casts the majority of your important spells, especially your ways to finish the game in the main board. As far as the actual lands that tap for mana, you have 2 Blood Crypt, 2 Watergrave, 1 Steam Vents. Again, this is kind of where it goes back to the fetch lands, where like sometimes you just want an untapped blue-red land on turn 1. Sometimes you do, but not very often. So you want to maximize the amount of black sources you have in the deck. So that's why playing 2 Blood Crypt and 2 Watergrave plus the 1 Steam Vents is important. And then for the Blood Moon decks and Field of Ruins and Path to Exiles and things of that nature, you play 1 of each of your basic lands minus the mountain. So you play 1 island and 1 swamp. So that's the entire main deck, mana base and all. The sideboard, this is the sideboard that I took for the event. 2 Grim Lavamancers, 2 Disdainful Stroke, a Stubborn Denial, Nihil Spellbomb, Anger of the Gods, Static Caster, 3 Surgical Extractions, an Engineered Explosives, 2 Liliana the Last Hopes, and a Kolaghan's Command. And some of the stuff obviously more what's the word I'm looking for? Great time to blank, Dakota. For the graveyard-based decks, I kind of wish I had a little bit more, but having sort of 5 slots dedicated to Dredge and the other graveyard-based decks like Storm, Surgical Extraction, very good. Obviously, the Sweet Phyrexian symbol right there is really good for us because it's a way that we can just pay life and give us another way to get card advantage on our opponent by just taking like their win condition or taking just one of their spells out of their graveyard to pump our shadow. I actually had a match where Surgical Extraction took a card out of my opponent's graveyard strictly so I could just lose the 2 life to then Temur Battle Rage a Death Shadow and kill them. So obviously that's not like the intended reason for Surgical Extraction, but it did serve its purpose of just being a way that we can lose life and make our creatures bigger and then either eventually kill our opponent or just kill our opponent. In that case, killed them. Grim Lavamancer, really, I won't say really good against the humans deck, but a card that you really want against humans. Same with Anger of the Gods and it threats, and then obviously Static Caster can finish off their Stubborn Denial. There's probably a case you can make about playing 4 Stubborn Denials in the main board and then just cutting the Faithless Looting, or even cutting like a Serum Visions and playing 2 Serum Visions. But I like playing 3 Stubborn Denials because there's a lot of the times where you just really want to have like the cantrip effects in your deck and just kind of rely on those to find one of your 3 Stubborn Denials instead of cutting a cantrip and playing a 4th of whatever card that you're looking to play. Spellbomb, Anger of the Gods, Surgicals, again, for those graveyard decks. It's terrible graveyard decks. Engineered Explosives, I didn't see any decks, but like Boggles, it's pretty good in the mirror match. Obviously, it's bad if it's Shadow versus Shadow, but obviously, if you just have an Explosives and they have 2 Shadows or whatever, like that card's very good. Liliana the Last Hope, again, for the creature decks. And Kolaghan's Command, just another like value card in the sideboard. The changes I was talking about earlier, there's probably some amalgamation of these cards where instead of playing Grim Lavamancers, you probably just want to play a Braids and then play like this Kolaghan's Command in the sideboard as well, taking out another Surgical Extraction or taking out the Nihil Spellbomb, and then just playing another Bolt or another Fatal Push in the deck to maximize your efficient removal, and then bringing in the Kolaghan's Command for like the artifact decks that I was talking about earlier, alongside with the Anger of the Gods. So really, that's my really long, rambly deck tech, kind of going over the decisions and the reasoning for why there's certain copies of whatever cards in the deck. As far as like the actual tournament report, we went 5-1-1 in the Swiss, which was good enough for the 4th seed in the top 8. We played against Hollowed One in the quarterfinals, which we won. And then we played against Blue-White Control, which is the worst matchup that this deck possibly has, because Terminus, Path to Exile, and then obviously all the sideboard cards that they have, plus uncounterable supreme verdicts, and it's just not a good day. I went through the 5 stages of grief in literally a game and a half. Or not even a game and a half, in 1 game and sideboarding. Went through the entire stages of grief. And we actually managed to win the blue-white matchup after losing the first game, which means we got the invite to the Open, or to the Invitational on June 7th through the 9th. As far as, you know, the other matchups went, like we played Affinity round 1. Like, I'll put it this way: the only matchup that we lost against was Amulet Titan, and game 1. I mean, I've heard it's decent, like it's a decent matchup for us. Like, you're slightly favored in those games, but that's where I was bringing up the Dismember Terminate split. That's probably where you want the Terminate more than you want the Dismembers, because they actually kill Titan. But aside from that, like, you really don't care, because most of the time you're just trying to get under them anyway. So it's a kind of decision point that, like, you're making that decision because you're also conceding the fact that you could possibly just be losing the game. So instead of making that decision where, all right, if I'm behind, this card could, like, attempt to get me back in front, you might as well just try to stay in front the entire time and hope that they don't find their Summoner's Pact and things like that. So, going over the different matchups we played against Affinity round 1, we played against Jund, we played against Titan in the 3rd round, lost to it, played against Mono Red Phoenix, won, played against Eldrazi, won, played against Storm, won, and then drew our last round to get into the top 8. The tournament was a lot of fun. It was great, and like I said before in the start of this, I've been playing this deck for 2 years. I've top 8'd 2 other invitational qualifiers and got smoked in the quarterfinals. So the fact that I even beat Hollowed One, which I got destroyed by in the second and then my first IQ that I top 8'd in, and was able just to beat it pretty easily, and then go on to play like my worst matchup and actually beat it, is amazing. And just no greater feeling than when you've just been hammering away playing a deck and just learning the ins and outs and really playtesting and training yourself for something like that. You never think that it's going to happen to you until it ends up happening. So really, that's kind of like my overview of really kind of a deck tech of Grixis Shadow, with the small, like, hey, we finally did something with the deck. We did the thing. So really, that's gonna be it for me in this video. It's been super long-winded and gone on a lot longer than I wanted to. Closing notes: if you're looking at playing this deck, a few decisions that I made that are different from the other ones. The Fatal Push Bolt split. Usually it's 3 pushes, 2 bolts. I like bolts because of the reach. Changing up the sideboard a little bit, obviously, for whatever meta you expect. And then if you're expecting a more going to a bigger tournament, I would suggest packing a Braids in over maybe even the Kolaghan's Commands, probably definitely over the Grim Lavamancers. Unless you really expect more humans, then I definitely like Grim Lavamancer over the Abrades. And yeah, that's going to be it for me in this video. Sorry it's been a while since I put one up. I've been going through a ton of stuff at work to finish up my training, and then obviously we had the event this past weekend and just other life things going on. So I appreciate you guys sticking around. But other than that, that's going to be it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.